Dr. Chaco. I'm a second year in the counseling program. So the poster is basically, it's a paper we're writing that I created this for ABCT, which was this past weekend. And it's on yoga and mindfulness interventions for youth with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. We conducted a meta-analysis and systematic review of the literature, which currently is pretty sparse. So it was an interesting meta-analysis to be trying to do, to say the least. But anyway, so I have a pretty big, I've been developing an interest in mindfulness interventions for kids with ADHD and other externalizing behaviors, sort of under the sort of principle that like mindfulness interventions tend to target impulsive behavior and sort of like taking time to think, sort of, and take a breath, take a pause, look at what your behavior is going to be, and to sort of, non-judgmentally assess and then, move from there and maybe not act on those impulses, which is typically an issue with kids who have ADHD or maybe things like conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. So we started to do this review. We were looking at studies that looked at youth, so ages 5 to 17, that were diagnosed with ADHD, or at least 50% of the sample had to have significant symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity based on parent or teacher ratings. They had to be looking at the short or longer term treatment effects of a yoga or mindfulness-based intervention, so it had to be a treatment outcome study essentially. It had to be published from 1990 to 2015 in an English journal, which actually did knock out quite a few studies because a lot of them were either German, weirdly enough, or they were written in like Hindi. They're from India. I know, interesting, right? So we conducted a database search, and we sort of based our sort of flowchart on the PRISMA guidelines, which I'm not going to explain here because it would take forever, but we just use those in case you want to look them up. So we used like Psych, Info, ERIC, PubMed, and Medline, and we used key terms like mindfulness and meditation and yoga were sort of one of our sections, and then we did attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. There were a lot. We threw in as much as we could to try and catch as much as we could. So we identified 772 articles through that database search after sort of taking out duplicates and all that. After duplicates was 319. I know, it's really small, right? So we screened those. We excluded 296 of the 319 because they were just not even at all what we were looking at. Most of them were either on like eating disorder things, and they had like impulsive somewhere in the title. So had to throw those out. So we then looked at 23 full-text articles that we coded. And from those, we excluded 9 just because they didn't meet our criteria for inclusion based on like age requirements or treatment outcome or things like that. So we ended up including 14 in our qualitative synthesis, which we're currently writing, so I don't have much to say about that. But then the meta-analysis, we had 12. 2 weren't included in the meta-analysis just because they looked at outcomes that none of the other studies were looking at. So there's no really way to cross the effect size for the information. So then our results, let's see, you can look at it, it's really tiny. Sorry, it got kind of big. So they basically showed that mindfulness-based yoga or meditation interventions had a statistically significant effect on the outcomes for ADHD symptoms, hyperactivity, and inattention, as both reported by parents and teachers. I was really impressed by the teacher effect size that was statistically significant, since teachers don't tend to report much change in any sort of ADHD intervention study, so that was pretty interesting to me. As well as child-parent relationship, executive functioning on the behavioral regulation scale, on-task behavior, parent stress, and parent trait mindfulness, so like the mindfulness of the parent themselves, since some studies also offered intervention to the parents. The effect sizes, so other than just being statistically significant, the effect sizes for several of the outcomes, ADHD symptom reduction for parent report, child-parent relationship were moderate, while 2 others, which was the executive functioning and the on-task behavior, could be considered to have really large effects. Really large. We also conducted tests of heterogeneity to see if there were sort of any differences between the studies across these outcomes. And we only found that the ADHD symptoms reported by the parents, which of course is one of our large effect sizes, so that's sort of depressing, did have a statistically significant heterogeneity. And if you look at it on here, like right here, oh god. Yeah, it goes from the lower limit, which is 0.036, to our upper limit, 0.937. Quite a spread. So once we get to the qualitative, we're probably going to look at why there was such a difference. Once we, there was 5 studies that looked at that as a result, so we're going to try and look into that. Our general qualitative analysis is going to talk about the fact that these studies all had pretty low quality. Either had really small sample sizes, some had 4 kids in them, some had 7. I think the largest that we got was 45 for a sample size, which is all really small. There was a lack of a control group for most of them. They didn't use manualized treatments, most of them. There's another one. Oh, and then a lot of them were only for 3 to 4 weeks, sort of intervention once a week, which to me is you're not gonna see changes. But either way, the sort of poor quality might have inflated our effect sizes. So further research is warranted. That's our basic conclusion. Thanks. That's it.